your 2023 mandala is, as I mentioned, incredibly complex. Angie, myself, and those that were in class were amazed at the complexity that you could produce in one day. I mean, you know, when we came back to start the next day and you showed the art, I'm like, how on earth did he do that in one day? I mean, we were looking at my 2023 mandala, which is based on the archetype of the chariot. And I told you it took me about probably around 45, 50 hours to do. And you did that in, whatever time we had one day. I know you worked on it through the evening, so still it's within one day. But I look at it, I'm still looking at this going, how in the freaking hell? I mean, the detail in there, and then it's really like about 10 pieces of art merged into one. But I'd love to know, how did you establish connection with your soul or source to begin your mandala process, and what was moving through you as you painted it? What were you experiencing? So how did you initiate the process, right? We all sat down, a lot of people, you probably saw the paperwork I sent out to everybody saying this is how you prepare. And a lot of people will not even do that. Of course, they'll just show up in class blank, right, and just stare at their canvas. And I've done a lot of these mandala. I've been running mandala workshops for, probably for, I would imagine, since 2006, maybe 7 or something like that. And so people can sit down, and people will actually sometimes break down and start crying and all sorts of stuff. They can't get anything to come out of them. And then other people follow the procedure I gave, but then there's people like you that have their own way. I'm just curious, how did you make connection with, well, first of all, what aspect of you painted? I mean, was it your mind? Was it how would you describe it? I mean, how did that come through you is the question.
Yeah. So I think the process is really important to describe. So I would say I definitely read the document you sent out. I think that's a really important document that helped me understand different ways to approach it as well. But I started setting my intentions. Whenever I do something that I feel is like a big thing, I'll start weeks ahead of time, if not like a month, and really start to get clear on what is it that I'm actually approaching and what am I trying to get out of it. Like, start to really set those intentions very clearly. So I would say every morning, maybe 3 weeks previously to the mandala workshop, I actually would meditate, between 10 and 30 minutes a day. Good. And those meditations started to kind of begin to align things. Right. And I was asking my soul really specific questions so that those ideas started to, come into like a confluence of ideas.
Right.
And then eventually I'd say I was sort of hoping that there was going to be more of a surge of ideas that came maybe like a week previously. And it was maybe the day before I was sitting there. And after each of these meditations, I would just pull out my sketchbook and write down notes that kind of came through for me. But it was the day before where it was like the cork just blew off, and I was like, I know exactly what it is that I'm actually going to start to work on. And so I just sat there and just almost just, for lack of a better term, like vomited everything that was coming through in sketches, whether it be writing, drawings, scribbles, whatever came through. And then once all that came through, that's where like my mind and my soul starts to like look at it and then starts to synthesize through it and say, okay, I can say this in a better way this way, or I can draw this in a better way this way. And so then I start to, take that, all those different pieces and start to align them into that puzzle that, comes out as the actual artwork itself. Yeah,
it's pretty good. I mean, I'm glad that you thought my document was good enough to use. I mean, with your skills, you might have looked at it and went, no, this guy's crazy. I got a way better way to do it than that. What was moving through you as you were painting? I mean, what did it describe that experience?
A lot of that comes down to is that I give myself, whenever I'm making art, I'm giving myself a constraint, giving myself like time, and giving myself space. And then once I have those, creativity just like naturally comes through. And whether it be like a couple hours or a whole day or a weekend or even longer. But as long as I give myself that space and then that time, everything starts to come through. So things that were coming through, it's almost like if you've ever seen the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, it's sort of that last moment in the film where they journey through the infinite, and it's just like shapes are coming through and colors are coming through. So for me, that's what starts to come through, but it's not just shapes and colors. Essentially, at one point I'm like, okay, and I start asking myself really deep questions on like, if a color comes through, I start to ask like, well, if blue is coming through, why is blue coming through? So I start to slow down the process inside of the process to be able to really, it really comes down to is really slowing down. So it becomes a visual meditation rather than just a, breathing meditation with my eyes closed. It's as if like, I'm there, but there is another force moving through me that's actually, creating the artwork, and that I'm also in dialogue with as it's happening.
That's what I call soul.
Okay. Yeah.
That's the, we have more on this coming up, so I won't get into it too much now, but, Henry, I think it's Henry Miller. Is it Henry Miller? The guy that wrote The Art Spirit.
Yes, I know the book.
Yeah, so he calls that the art spirit, And so that's my favorite part of painting is when the art spirit starts, you know that you're being painted.
Yes.
You're not painting, you're being painted through, and I call that being painted. And that for me is when I'm the highest, it's like, okay, I've got the art spirit here. And,
totally.
And I just let go to it. And it's like, sometimes I'm talking to the art spirit, go, are you sure you want to do that? That might screw this whole thing up, And I'm like, well, the art spirit says yes, so here we go. And sometimes I look at what I paint and go, I don't even know how I did that. I really couldn't. If you asked me to paint that, I couldn't do it. And that's when the art spirit's there.
Yeah, it's an incredible experience to just feel that spirit moving through because it's like it knows before you know. Yeah, it's like that idea of like getting out of our own way, and it works.
Yeah, the other thing too that I experience is I'm sure you've experienced it, when the art spirit's moving through you, if all of a sudden your ego starts wanting to change something, you can feel, there's a feeling like, it's almost like you're about to cheat on your wife or something. It's like you're not holding hands with your dance partner and, you're stepping on toes here.
Yeah.
And like, I find that happens, like the ego, my ego, tends to want to over decorate things or, put too many things in. And so one of the things the art spirit has taught me is that less can be much more, And so that's been a real transition in my own art, is just knowing when to not keep going, right? Because sometimes you can end up being like a kid that doesn't know when to stop adding, right?
Yeah, that's a big problem. I think that's something that I've learned. It goes back to like when I was talking about Art Center, is that when going through school, that was a big problem. It's like, I'm like, oh, well, if I can just make this, I'll just make it. But that doesn't necessarily lead to better results. So the editing process and being able to edit in real time. So it's like the spirit is coming through, and then challenging these things as they come through, and just being like, does this really need, like, does this mark need to be put down? Does this, idea need to be expressed? And if it doesn't, it's just almost an instant moment where you say, like, you just eliminate it and just be like, no, that doesn't need to be there. It's just, and so that it focuses everything to the ultimate idea. And it is interesting because I can feel it. It feels like a clear channel. Like it's just like you go through like a, I don't know, pipe, like you're just going through it. And then when it starts to get too like constrictive, just take a breath, and then it opens and more ideas start to come through. And that to me is like, I don't think it's the same, but when I see, and hear about surfers riding a wave, I'm like, that seems like one of the coolest things to experience. I feel like this is sort of that, but from the inside out.
Yes. This discussion we're having about, knowing when not to add or what to add, one of the ways I like to think of God is that God is an artist, and God, it's just all pure creativity. It's not like God's sitting around going, well, I really fucked that up. It's really more like Jackson Pollock going at it with a paintbrush, and it looks like he's just having a seizure while he's painting, And so the point I'm making is, isn't it interesting that if you look at your life, all of us, as though it is art, wouldn't we all gain a lot from that very same process, right? How many relationships turn out to be problematic, and we should just not keep adding them to the art? Or how many times maybe is there an opportunity that we talk ourselves out of, maybe because we're insecure about something, or we convince ourselves that we don't have time, but look at it in hindsight and go, wow, I really wish I would have done that. Like, for example, if you listened to someone else and didn't go to the school you went to, you may have regretted it one day and realized that you were being guided there for a reason, right? And like you said, that previous meeting with the designer came back to you years later and it all clicked into place. Don't you think if we looked at our life as art and listened to the art spirit, which would be our soul, that we might make more beauty instead of, over painting the world?
Absolutely.